Yes,
anyway to that most people.
and that is helpful. Nothing cosmetic, though. It has to be something essential to making that vehicle run.
Okay.
Nothing cosmetic.
All right.
But all kinds of other things. If you're a survivor of rape, we will cover the forensic rape examination. And there are a couple different ways that we would do that. One is through a direct reimbursement to the providers that's been established in our law. If the person wants to make a claim beyond that, because they don't even have to make a claim for that service, but if they want to make a claim beyond that for ongoing prescriptions or therapy, then that's something else that we can do.
One thing I saw in the description, which I wouldn't have thought of in a million years, is crime scene cleanup. If I own a piece of property where a crime is committed and there's a mess, I'm responsible for cleaning that up?
Yes.
Really?
Yes, and you can imagine, I mean, in the most horrendous types of crimes, there may be blood stains, you know, you would want a new carpet if this is a place that you're going to live in. And I don't think people are even aware of the fact that this form of assistance is available because, frankly, I haven't seen it requested. You know, in the last year and a half or so that I've been working on this job, I haven't seen claims requesting crime scene cleanup very often.
Interesting. And there was just another law that took effect that provides for some wage compensation if you have to be with your child who was a crime victim?
Yes.
Explain
Loss
that
of earnings has always been available to victims who have suffered physical injury, and loss of support to surviving family who lose the main wage earner through a homicide or through a physical injury crime. That's always been available. $30,000 maximum for the claim, $600 maximum per week that we will allow. Before this change in the law, which came into effect October 1st of this year, if a parent needed to be at the hospital with a child who was hospitalized as a result of crime, well, they had to use whatever time was available to them through their employer.
If they had any.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, rather than use that time or lose the earning power that they're given when they choose to come to the hospital with their child, the Crime Victims Board will reimburse them for that, again, up to the $600 maximum, $30,000 total maximum. And that is for the victim and the parent combined. So you could have a situation where you have a teenager who is working. Well, then we're going to pay so much for the child who's working, pay so much for the parent who is attending to the child at the hospital. But it's a brand new law, and we know that it's going to have a powerful impact because we were hearing from our advocates across the state that this was something that parents needed to make ends meet.
Where do you, as the Crime Victims Board, get your money from? Is it strictly state money, or do you go chasing after the perps?
Well, it comes from a lot of different sources. A big chunk of it is from federal money. We have, since 1980s, early 1980s, mid-1980s, the Victims of Crime Act. And those VOCA funds can be used both for what we call, quote-unquote, compensation, as well as grant making to local providers. So a good chunk of our money comes from federal dollars. And the good news is most of that money comes from federal offenders who are paying hefty fines. Hefty fines. Okay. I mean, you can imagine in the typical big white-collar case, there's a hefty fine. And that money is in the billions now. And so nationally, compensation boards across the country are able to benefit from crime. So instead of crime paying for the defendant, crime is paying for victims. So a good chunk of our money is coming from federal money. Some of it comes from state money. And of the state, you have things like the crime victim assistance fee that's assessed on fines and surcharges and criminal defendants and misdemeanors and felonies and even for some violations.
So this is a surcharge on top of the fine, similar to what you often find with a moving violation for car.
Yeah, so a good deal of our money actually comes from offenders themselves and a small portion from tax dollars.
Interesting. There's something that struck me in the board's mission statement, the phrase innocent victim. What do you mean by innocent victim, and why do you make that distinction?
Well, I think the originators of our law had in mind to help, first and foremost, people who through no fault of their own happen to be crime victims. And I always give the example of the typical bar fight. Person A starts a fight with person B. Person A punches person B wins the fight. Well, we don't compensate, or we have the option of not compensating person A for the injury that they suffered as a result of instigating and being the primary aggressor in that fight. Now, we do have options. Depending on the circumstances, we can reduce the award or that they're seeking, or we can reject it altogether. So I think that's the beauty of having a board member actually sit and reflect on this case and try to be fair to the person making the claim and to be fair to all the other victims out there who we know through no fault of their own were victimized. The person minding their own business, the Good Samaritan trying to step in and help a person who is being victimized, a child, someone who's a senior citizen. Lots of people are victimized. Most people are victimized through no fault of their own, and we certainly wouldn't want to deplete whatever assistance is available to help people who aren't innocent given the circumstances of the crime.
Philosophical question, if I may. In, I would imagine, the vast majority, if not every one of the cases that you're dealing with, the state did not commit the crime.
Right.
Why does the state feel a responsibility to compensate somebody who was a victim of a crime that the state really had nothing to do with?
Well, our preamble of the executive law, Article 22, actually sheds some light on this. It seems to me that in the mid-60s, when this compensation board was created, the ideal was to serve as a safety net, because we know that when people are victims of crime, particularly violent crimes, they can suffer debilitating losses, physically, emotionally, financially. And I think the state believed at that time, legislators in their wisdom at that time understood that if there wasn't a safety net, that this person who'd already suffered some horrible trauma could hit rock bottom and in turn become a ward of the state indefinitely. And I think the thinking was that if you could help people immediately, get them assistance as soon as possible, to help empower them, to help return them to a path where they can find their way back to normalcy, then they won't become wards of the state. And the cost in the short run is far less than the cost in the long run of letting that person fall, letting their loved ones fall, letting their families fall to the wayside, again, through no fault of their own.
Let's do a little procedural stuff. How does one apply for an award?
Well, the process starts with getting the information, obviously, and that's why opportunities like this are so wonderful.
Do the police usually help with that, at least let folks know that they might be eligible for something?
Yes.
Okay.
A couple of years ago, the law was changed to require that all law enforcement agencies, the first responders, hand out information cards at each and every instance where they interface with a victim.
Right.
And on the card, it gives our basic information, how to contact the agency, a little bit about what we do for victims, so that the person right at go, as soon as they're having contact with a police agency and reporting a crime, knows that our agency exists.
Okay.
So that's how it starts in many instances. Sometimes it can come from a district attorney's office. And we have partnerships and grant relationships with district attorney's offices all across the state. And sometimes cases don't originate with a 911 call. Sometimes they originate with an investigation started perhaps through a police agency, but more directly with the district attorney's office. So they also have the responsibility to hand out pamphlets with our information on it, and to make victims aware of the fact that we exist. And we also have relationships with almost 200 victim assistance providers. These are local community-based agencies all across the state that also share information about the Crime Victims Board and assist claimants and victims in filling out the application. So an application is filled out, and then it is sent into our Albany office, and it proceeds from there. The information is input into the system, the investigation takes place, and then the claim is considered by a board member. But all along the way before you get there, there are a lot of people that help to steer victims to that information and to that application process.
And then how long, you mentioned